All right. Good evening. This is another live training session from Unity Technologies. My name is Adam Buckner, one of the live trainers here at Unity. We might see Matt as Matt Mirrorfish in the session tonight, and today is a continuation of making a generic modal window. Now, on the last session, last week, we got most of the way through the basics of the generic modal window, and we learned a thing or two while we were doing it. And today we're going to continue on. We're going to look at some more UI elements. We're going to look at some of the additional functionality, including adding that icon that we didn't get to on the last session. And then we'll also talk about passing in parameters. And we're going to take a look at using something called a lambda. We're not going to explain what a lambda is because it's beyond the scope of today's session, but we will certainly show you how to use some form of it. Not really my favorite way of doing things, using something without explaining it, but in this case, it's very helpful. Woohoo! Falcrons! Watching this from virtual reality in alt space. So, modal window. We created a modal window the last time, and yes, it does cover the entire screen. In this case, except for our test button, it needs to be the because when we run this, it'll become the last sibling, so it's going to cover everything else because of the script we wrote. We will cover that in a second. Let's go put you back to where you were before. And then we've got our yes, no, and our cancel buttons. We have a space for an icon, and we have a space for text. So if we look at that modal panel, we have, let's go into the scene view. So we've got that panel that covers the entire canvas. What we have done is we've got this modal window, and it starts off with a basic panel. It's just simply a UI image in a panel stretched to fit. And it's semi-transparent, so it darkens down the material behind it. And this is what absorbs all of the input. So this modal panel will stop you from interacting on any of the other UI elements that are below it in this particular canvas. If you have multiple canvases, you'll need to be slightly more clever. But we're just working with this on one canvas. And then we've got our modal dialog. Let me bring that up into the right mode. Our modal dialog panel. And this is another panel that has our parchment background. And then in that, we've got two sub-panels that are invisible. We have turned their alpha down to nothing. And they hold our, at the top in the question panel, the potential image and the potential text. And then our button panel, which has our yes, no, and cancel buttons. And the way that we're driving this is with our layout elements. So if you look at the parent panel, we have a horizontal layout group, and that's going to be driving the content. So if we turn off any particular piece of content, the other content inside that panel, because of that vertical, in this case, horizontal layout group. So, and because of this horizontal layout group, when we turn off these items, it's going to go ahead and they'll adjust. And this is more important. This is partly important for that icon we have up there, but it's also very important here for our buttons, because if we take a look at the buttons down here and we turn them off, we can have any number of buttons that we want, between 1 and 3. So if we simply want to make an announcement, we can just have one button that just says dismissed, you can't do that. Okay, hit the cancel button, or we can get rid of the cancel button and we can have our yes and no buttons. In this particular case, we have a yes, no, and cancel button. You could, if you wanted to, have 3 generic buttons, button 1, button 2, and button 3. And with this setup that we've done with only a small amount of extension, you could also send the text that is supposed to be on the button. So you could have it say cancel, you could have it say okay, you could have it say yes, no, and cancel, you could have it say 1, 2, and 3. You could send into any text that you wanted. I see Unlocked Lake has asked, anyone know what could cause an instantiation of a UI element with the top of the height of the screen instead of the one in the prefab? Yes, Unlocked Lake, that could be based on its content fitter. If there's something about its parent, where it is, the parent could be forcing it to do something, because if you imagine these buttons, they're prefab. So let's go up here to the select, and we can look at that button. And as a matter of fact, this button has a size of 0. We haven't put anything in it, but we could make this button have a size, a width, and a height. And when we instantiate that button here, the button panel parent is going to have a layout group, and that button panel parent is going to drive that rect transform of the children. We can see here this rect transform is grayed out. In many cases, we can't affect the anchors, we can't affect the position or the width and the height. And it says some values are driven by a horizontal layout group. So it should tell you. So there are many reasons that you could, because the UI is quite powerful, that you could instantiate a prefab and have that prefab's rect transform changed by a parent or its canvas. Okay, so carrying on. What else have we done? We have created a test panel over here in the corner, and this test panel is where we're going to be testing some of our additional. Let me just frame selected on that. Some of our additional choices that we're going to do right now. We just have the yes, no, and cancel that we worked out at the end of last session, and we're going to be creating some more and adding them in. I do want to take this opportunity, however, to talk about some of the layout group settings, because the layout group settings were less important to me than getting the modal window working. And so I breezed past a couple of these settings and sort of whipped them out rather quickly. And I've had some questions over the week as to exactly how these layout groups work, the child force expand, and how those children interact with that vertical layout group. So let me go ahead and quickly look at that. So we're going to take a pause from our modal window and do just some straight UI stuff here for a moment. So if we look at the test panel that we have here, and this is another parent that is, again, with no source image and with an alpha set to nothing, set to full black, set to 0. So it's invisible, and it's holding our button prefab that we have down here. I mean, we could put in another one if we wanted, and we can see that it's acting a little bit funny when we pop in that button. And that's because when we look at the vertical layout group, it's going to be doing its best to create a nice even set of elements in its content. And we have no padding, so we want to have all of these butted up. So you'll see no padding between the old button and the new button, and no spacing. And then our child is set to upper center, and we are forcing expand only the width, and we're not expanding the height, so it's gotten crushed. Now on the children, we have a layout element. So we have a layout element here, and I have set the minimum height to 40 and the preferred height to 40. Now quickly, let me delete this button, because we want to deal with an element. Well, we could quickly, I mean, if we want to, we could put on a layout element on this one. So if you go to layout element, and then we could give it a minimum height, again, like the other one, of 40, and a preferred height of 40 if we wanted to. And we can see that that layout element is now expanding that button to our minimum and preferred heights that we've put in here. So again, I'm going to delete this just because I want to deal with the buttons that we have already preset up. And we can do that by duplicating, and you see we have another button. So how do these work in order, the layout element? Well, when we're, oops, the difference between preferred height, minimum height, 40 please, and preferred height also makes a difference when you get larger than the parent. So let's say we have preferred height on all of these, and you can see that minimum height's doing nothing. And we go to the other one, we can turn off its minimum height as well. And its preferred height is 40, looks fine. Let's duplicate another one, and now we have 3 looking fine. Now we have, let's duplicate one more, 4. And now as we get larger than our panel, you can see it's keeping them inside the panel, yet it's crushing them down, because our preferred height is 40, but if we cannot fit them all inside the panel, what we will lose here is, our preferred height, but it's preferred, it's not our minimum height, it'll start crushing down that size. So let's remove some of these. and go back and see what happens if we then affect our minimum height. So if we say our minimum height is 40, let me turn that off, and then we can duplicate this. We can see that when we get larger, since we said our minimum height is 40 and it gets larger than the panel, it's going to then go outside of the panel area and will continue to build even if it's larger than the panel. So you can actually have more content than your panel if you've then put in minimum height. And I find that just in general, I am now doing both preferred and minimum height. So that was sort of an explanation as to what we were dealing with last week in this session when it comes to how does preferred height and minimum height and expand height and width. And if you have expand height on, you can see that it's expanding to fit the entire area and will then shrink because essentially there is no max height. We only have minimum height, we have preferred height, and we don't have a max height. So it will continue to fill up that space until we exceed the volume, and because we have both a minimum height and a preferred height, we'll now pop out. The logic dictates that we pop outside of that square. So for that, since I want to be able to fill up the space, I'm going to make sure that we have turned off expand height. We leave on force expand width so it fits the area, and we have our layout element with our minimum height and preferred height, in this case of 40. I think that is actually one of the refactoring I did between the last session and this session, so I thought 60 was too big, so I've brought that down to 40. Now I want to pick up where we left off. Oh, what you're seeing down here is that normally I leave my cache server on. It's a little file that's going to run and sit in the background, and that runs my cache server. So let me clear that. Our modal dialog panel has one script on it, and that is bring to front. And if we look at that quickly, it simply says when we enable the script, we want to bring the transform and set it as the last sibling, so we bring it on top. And we want to make sure that because of this, we don't want to see our modal dialog box when we're running, so we start with it off, and it can be anywhere in the canvas because we know when we turn it on at runtime, it'll be popped to the top. So there we go. Let's save this and let's hit play. And we have one test button. We go ahead and we hit test. And let's make sure we're connected. What have we done? Because I've been monkeying with this. Oh, test button, panel. Oh, yeah, we've changed. I refactored the name. When I refactored it from text, which was a typo, to test, I needed to replace it. So we need to make sure that we have that game object correctly put in, and then test yes, no, cancel, rather than text yes, no, cancel. That was one of the other fixes that I made. I picked it up as a typo. But obviously, if you change the name of your script, or you change the name, in this case, of the function, we won't be able to find it. So let's go ahead and hit play again. You're running. There we go. So we've got our test. It sends, would you like a poke in the eye with a sharp stick? And then we can say yes, no, or cancel. So I'm going to say no. No way, Jose. And we get that if we look at our scripting. Our test modal panel is simply going to call this modal panel choice, and then it's going to send it a question, and then a yes action, a no action, and a cancel action. And if we look at our modal panel, we can see that we have a thing called choice, and it takes that question as a string, a unity action as a yes event, unity action as a no event, and a unity action as a cancel event. And this function, the first thing it's going to do is set that modal panel to true, and then depending upon the button, it's going to add a listener to each one of the buttons. First, it's going to remove all listeners, and then add a listener, which is the yes event to the yes, the no event to the no, the cancel event to the cancel. And then it's going to add the close panel to each one of those as well. So when the person, whoever clicks on this button, it'll trigger the event they chose, yes, no, or cancel, and then close the window. The other thing that this particular function will do, and this we're going to make different overrides of this function, is it is going to set the question text, it's going to set the icon, and then turn on or turn off, well, it's going to turn off the icon in this case, and then turn on or turn off the buttons that we're using, yes, no, and cancel. Movie Masters is asking, I'm a bit confused about how unity actions work. What exactly in the function method is being run from. Are there any complications with Unity actions I need to watch out for when using them? Hold on a second, and I'm going to be explaining Unity actions a little bit more in detail. So just hold on, and we'll talk about them. They are essentially function pointers, and they point to a function when an event is triggered. So you trigger an event, and then the listener has a list of functions that it will call when that event is triggered. So the first thing I want to do here is I want to talk about adding in the image icon. I also want to talk about a simpler way of calling these actions. When you look at a Unity action, the sort of proper way to do this is you describe an action and you give it a title, give it a name, and then you assign that action. You say that my Unity action is equal to a new Unity action, and then you can wrap up a function into that Unity action. But there are easier ways to do this, which is that you don't need to declare the Unity action when you're sending it. You can simply send the function itself. Now, on the receiving end, this still needs to be a Unity action. But C# can see the function itself, and it can cast it into that action, into that Unity action. So we don't have to send the Unity actions. We can simply send the functions themselves. And so it's a slightly easier way to do it because you don't have all of this fiddliness where you've got to set up the action. You then have to, initialize the action and then wrap up a function in it. You can simply send your function directly. So in theory, this should work exactly the same. Heck yeah, poke me in the eye with a stick. And we've done that, so we still need to make sure that on our modal window that we bring in a Unity action, but we can send it these functions directly. So let's go ahead and figure out how we can send that image. We do something with that image. Let's go back to our modal panel, and what we're going to do is create an override, come back here, of this particular function. So let's copy and then paste this. And we have our yes, no, cancel. So let's make this a yes, no, cancel with image. And we're going to send it a string and then a sprite, then that yes event, no event, and that cancel event. And so in this particular one, we're going to still have choice, so it's going to be an override, and we're going to send that string question, and then we're going to send a sprite called icon image. One of the other big things that we need to do is we assign our question. So then we need to assign this .icon image .sprite, because we're sending a sprite, needs to be equal to our icon image. So remember that we have our public image, icon image, and what that is doing is looking at our panel. Let's bring that up. And on that panel, we have our image here that's going to hold whatever we choose to send to it. And we have that reference on our manager. So when we're looking at our modal panel, we have a reference to the icon image, which is that image there, which refers to this image here in our on our panel. So we're going to, in our script, we're going to set the question text, we're going to set the icon image sprite, and then we also need to make sure that we set, it was different the other time, is we turned off the image graphic holder. So in this case, let's go ahead and set that to true. So we're going to turn on our image, we're going to turn on our yes, no, and cancel button. So let's save this. Now let's return to our test modal script, and we need to call this. So the first thing we need is a public sprite icon. So we've got a way of, on our test script, including the image, and then we need to send, and again, I'm going to get into copying and pasting, so let's go ahead and copy this yes, no cancel script, and let's make this yes, no, cancel image. So we've got an I there. And then what is our question? I'm going to repeat the one that we have in our test, which is that do you like this icon? And we're going to send the icon. We send the icon, we send the test yes function, the test no function, and that test cancel function. So we save that, and we can return to Unity. We want to duplicate the yes no button. So this is our test button. So let's duplicate this one and call this our yes no cancel, and then image. And then we want to put the same thing. I'm just going to copy and paste this into our text so we have a label. So now we can vaguely see the difference when we look at them in the in that button of tests. And then we also want to change on the button our test modal window, and we want to pick the one with image. So we're now picking a new test. So let's save this one and go in and hit play. Oh no, we need to assign our image. Duh. So we now have an icon down here that we can put in. So let's go ahead and add that icon. So we can go to our images. Let's go to our sprites. Let's pick Zom Lerps there, our zombie lerps. And so now we have an icon to send. And so let's go ahead and hit play. Oh, we need to turn that off. That's right, come back here. Jumping ahead. Showed you the modal panel. Now we turn the modal panel off. There we go. And then this should be able to say, yes, do you like the icon? Yes, no, and cancel. This includes the cancel. You could choose to just send that with yes and no, but you can do that by rewriting these overrides and rewriting these test buttons. Because if you look at the way that this is working out, you can see that to make this work inside the modal panel, you're just going to need overrides for every single thing that you want. So if you want one with an icon, one without an icon, one with a yes event, with a no event, you just need to make overrides that include all of the options that you need. Minorop, why not add game object set active to false inside the awake functions of the modal panel so you don't have to do it yourself? That's a good point, because I hadn't really thought that far. We could do that. Yes, we could. We could write a script that says, just deactivate me. Which... let's see how that would work. That should work fine. I haven't really thought through any of the ramifications, but nothing seems to pop up, which would be that should work just fine. Thanks for the suggestion. Normally, I'm not bouncing back and forth as much as we are here to show something off. And yes, you would. I suppose I could have put it into bring to front. I have a tendency to try to keep things componentized so that bring to front is a separate component from deactivate me, but that should work fine. Cool. Thanks for the suggestion. I'm going to get rid of this clicked. That was from, oh, it's because I don't have clear on play. That is from old bits. There we go. So let's do some quick brute force coding and create a couple of these so you can see that pattern. It's going to be pretty obvious what the pattern is. But and then we'll move on to some additional functions that we can pass parameters in. So let's take this yes, no, cancel. And let's paste that in. There we go. Thank you. And then let's just do this with a string and cancel. So just a string and cancel event. And I just mostly want to show this off so that we can see how the pattern is and how you'll make all of these that you want. And this is just going to be an announcement. And it's going to be a string and a cancel event. And then all we need is our question. We don't need the yes event. We don't need the no event. And we need our cancel event. We can remove the yes and no's completely. We still want to keep our modal panel set active true. Then we just simply have our cancel event and our close panel. We still want to set the question, but we also want to make sure that yes and no is false. We could copy this yes, no, and cancel again a second time. And the reason why I'm doing this, this repeated copying is that they're all pretty much identical. And we could remove the cancel event in this case. So we just have a yes and a no event. And this is going to be yes and no. So we have a string event, a yes event, and a no event. So there's no cancel here. And so then we can remove the cancel part. And then, again, everything is the same, except we want now our cancel button to be set false. So ultimately, your modal panel window will end up having one of these for every possible combination that you can imagine. And then in our test modal panel as well, we would want to update that to have test functions so that we would be sending to our choices, because we now have more choices to pick from, with more overrides being just a simple announcement all the way up to yes, no, and having that icon. So let's talk about testing things where we want to send a parameter, because right now these are all parameterless. There are a couple of different ways of doing this. There is, if we look at the documentation, we can extend Unity Action. Unity Action comes with a 0 argument version, which is arguably what we're doing, and then 1, 2, 3, and 4 argument versions of Unity events. And we can extend these. Sadly, it doesn't have a lot of documentation on this. If you look at events, but if you look at the way that things work in Unity event, and annoyingly enough, right now they have to be in JavaScript. We only have JavaScript examples instead of, we don't have any C# of this. You can look at how you can extend events and how you can extend Unity actions, and you can get multiple argument versions of both actions and events. I will leave this up to you if this is something that you want to research, because if we use a lambda, it is a little bit easier. And yes, I know that this is a bit code heavy and fiddly. But we're in our, let's bring up our test modal panel, and we are going to use a lambda to be able to put functions that have a parameter list into essentially a parameter-less Unity action. So let's go ahead and create some things to spawn. So let's, under our icon, let's add a public transform spawn point and a public game object, let's just thing to spawn. And then in a test, let's create a function. So we want void, let's see if I can bring this up a little higher, void instantiate object. And that will take a game object to instantiate, and let's just call this thing to instantiate. And when we instantiate this, let's talk to our display manager again, which we talk about in episode 1. And then we ask it to display a message, and that message is, here you go. So we've got a little feedback saying we've created something. And then let's instantiate, our thing to instantiate. And where shall we put this? Let's just put this at the spawn point dot position, and our spawn point dot rotation. So we have instantiate object, and so now this is a function that's going to be difficult for us to send, because right now we're using the parameterless version of the Unity action. So we can do that by writing this using a lambda. So let's go up to our tests, and this will be a public up here. So public void, and let's just call this our test lambda. There we go. And the syntax for this is going to be, let's talk to our modal panel, and we're going to again do a choice. And let's just ask a question. Do you want to create this sphere? Or create a sphere? Do you want to create a sphere? Is the question. And then we need a yes and a no event. And our no event is pretty easy. We have it down below, our no event. But our yes event, and remember these do have to be in order, is going to be parentheses. So essentially I like to think of this as an empty thing. And what is our empty thing equal to? Our empty thing is going to be equal to, and this is in brackets, our instantiate object. And then our instantiate object, we want to include our thing to spawn. And we need our semicolon. Oh, and my comma. There we go. That's where I've got the red line. So here we have now basically shoved, instead of just sending a function, we are sending into the parentheses, we are sending in the name of the function we want to call. We have our parentheses, we have the parameter we're sending, and then the semicolon that is inside brackets, and then properly between commas when we're sending inside these arguments. So let's write another one while we're here, just so that you can see how this works. So I'm copying and pasting another one. Let's call this test lambda 2. And actually, let's go ahead and let's go ahead and test this before we get too far ahead. We've done one. Let's just go ahead and test this. So let's save this. Let's return to Unity. And so we want to have a new button. So that's going to be, we're going to duplicate our yes/no image button, and let's call this test lambda, our test lambda button, and then let's change the text. Test lambda button. We can see we now have a third button up there. And in our button, we want to change the function to, we don't see it. What's the error? Member modal panel's choice string has already been defined. Oh, do I have a double one? I may have duplicated too many things. Yeah, I did. No event does not work in this concept. Oh, because I'm sorry, this is because I wrote it the other way. This needs to be updated to being the no function. There we go. Live coding, it's fun. So now that's ready, we can be able to, now we've compiled, so we can do our test lambda. There we go. Yeah. So there's our spawn point. Let's go ahead and create one. So let's create a empty object, and let's reset that to 0. And I'm going to go out of 2D mode, and let's go down to our quad and our camera. And if we don't want to see the UI, we should be able to turn off the UI layer temporarily. And our camera is at origin, and our quad is Z50. So let's put our spawn point, let's put that at Z25. So about halfway between here and there. And then maybe up a bit. 15. We'll see how that works. So there's our spawn point. Go back to our test button. Let's assign our spawn point. Oops, let's just get that up there so we can see it. Let's close down some. Let's assign our spawn point. And then our thing to spawn is just going to be a sphere that we've got going. So I'm going to go back into 2D mode and go back to our canvas and zoom in. And let's put back our UI layer. So let's save this and hit play. There we go. Do you want to create a sphere? Yes. Awesome. No. No way, Jose. One of the things I'm noticing is that the order of things that we have, look at where that shadow is. That's on top of our button. So we can fix that by taking our display text and putting it at the back. So let's hit that again. Oops. Wrong button. And then test lambda. And you can see that, do we want to create a sphere? Yes, we've passed that sphere in as a parameter by using the lambda. Now, this way of working is actually kind of convenient because we can create more complicated methods as well. So you can create one that has two things to instantiate. So test instantiate object, say 2, and grab our thing to instantiate. Let's copy that and paste. So we have two game objects to instantiate, thing to instantiate 2, and then we can instantiate twice. And we want our thing to instantiate 2. So you can see simply, I just want to instantiate 2 things. And then let's take our spawn point position and let's just make this minus vector3, 1. So it'll be slightly offset. And then this one, let's make that plus vector3, 1. So we can save that. And then for our test function, we can, let me just copy the test lambda. And we can call this test lambda 2 and say, do you want to create 2 spheres? Make that plural. And we have, again, we're putting into the parentheses, we've got our equal to and greater than symbol, and then we want to instantiate thing to spawn, and then just thing to spawn. So we now have 2 arguments, 2 parameters, and we don't need that. So we've got a thing to spawn twice. I'm going somewhere with this in a second. You'll see why I'm going out of my way to do this with 2. And again, oh, what have I done wrong? Oh, spawn point rotation. I want this in spawn point position. Yeah, can't really add a vector3 to a quaternion like that. It's not the preferred method of doing 4th dimensional maths. And again, let's duplicate our test lambda button, and that's test lambda 2 button. So now we have our test lambda 2 button, and we're going to change that button element. Oh, I've closed it down. There we go. Button element is going to become lambda 2. So when I test the second one, do I want to create 2 spheres? Yes. So now we have 2 spheres involved. So this was a bit simple, where we now have 1 creating 1. We've got a 2-parameter list lambda. But we can also do this, which I actually think is actually kind of clever, which is just by changing our test lambda, do you want to create 3 spheres? And what we're going to do here is we've got our instantiate object with the override with 2 parameters. And I'm also just going to copy this. Copy that. Okay, so now I've put 2 functions in here. So I'm not just sending 1 function, I'm actually sending 2 functions, a single parameter and a double parameter function, into this same action. So again, let's one more fiddly little duplicate. And we've got a test lambda 3 button. And a label. Button. Right, this one. Change that over to lambda 3. You get the picture as I beat this dead horse. And now we get all three of them. And that's because we can use that lambda to put as many of these as we want to in there. We can have multiple parameters. We can actually have multiple functions. So there we are. There we have it. Any questions? Again, it was a bit fiddly. It's a bit blunt force in this particular way of, yes, doing all the overrides. But I did want to show that you can pass multiple functions. You can pass multiple parameters in those functions simply using that lambda syntax. That lambda syntax is so it's double parentheses equal to greater than brackets, function name, and then our argument list, followed by a semicolon. So yes, open it up to Q&A. Let's start off with things that are related to today's session, and then we can migrate into other things. I don't have a ton of time for Q&A today. Sorry for this being a bit code heavy and being a bit fiddly, but it seems to be the nature of this this particular solution. But hopefully you can dig through this and you can get the modal dialog panel that you want. Can Kalatrava says, thank you. I'll need to read about Unity events some more. I find them to be very, very interesting. They're based on C# events and based on C# actions. They are built into Unity. They are sadly at this point underdocumented. They are what the UI system uses for passing along events and functions and actions inside the UI system, which is partly why I wanted to do this this session using those rather than, say, C# delegates. You could probably do this using C# delegates as well. It's just not something that I chose to do with this. So I wanted to keep it in that nature. It also allows me to easily hook straight into these on-click events that are already listed inside Unity's API. So you're sort of working in an integrated manner with a UI that already exists. But it's certainly worth trying to find out more information on Unity actions, on Unity events, and giving them a go and seeing how they work. Kastraken is asking, on the modal window, would it be difficult to make it movable, like a standard window or Mac modal? This would be more for multiple modals on screen like you see in some MMO games. Being that it's modal, one of the main issues is that you're supposed to not be able to do anything else until you've answered the question that's there. If you can have multiple windows that you can interact with, it's not modal. You can make this, you can use this back end to fill all sorts of things that you want to. This idea of having a reference to and hooking into dynamic windows and dynamic buttons can be used in other forms other than a modal window. You can make this movable. Take a look at the Panes, Panels, and Windows live session where we talk about making hotspots and header bars and draggable sections, so you can move your windows, you can resize your windows, you can open and close your windows. So you can apply all of those UI techniques to this panel, and you can have it movable. What would happen in this particular case, if you added, say, a movable hotspot and a resizable hotspot and all of that on this window, it would float around on top of the modal panel, so our modal dialog would just be floaty. Imagine this at runtime because you could drag it. And it would also be on top. So there we go. I've just separated that off the modal panel, didn't I? I did. So you want that one on top. Is that what will happen at runtime? And then this will be the one that's moving around. Yes, you can move it. There's nothing to stop you from moving this piece. This is a panel or a pane like anything else in the UI. But the true idea of a modal one is that you're given a critical question. You cannot do that. Okay. Do you want to destroy this item? So if you were dropping something out of your inventory, you might want to have something like this. Do you want to destroy this? Yes. No. Yes. Destroy item. No. Put the item back in your inventory. And you'd have two methods on your inventory manager. One, destroy item, and the other one, replace item or cancel whatever your effect was. Grizzly Studio, yes, we do have a lesson for dragging windows around, and I believe it's just called Panes, Panels, and Windows on the archive. So you'd go to the archive and look for UI, Panes, Panels, and Windows. Yeah, how to resize them, open them, close them, and drag them around. So that's this one. I Am Deity has an unrelated question. Why is it that Unity Editor still locks up when you accidentally have a non-stop while loop, when we have an infinite loop? Well, because you have an infinite loop and it's running. Because Unity doesn't break into your loop, and the loop is taking all the resources. Unity is spending all of its resources doing that while loop. GM Liquid Media asks, on the UI panels, can I save the position after the user has moved it using serialization? Yes, you should. You should be able to save that to a file and then just be able to open that up again. There are some neat UI tricks which I think would be fun to do. Not a Unity game, but on World of Tanks Blitz, they've got a sprite-based UI of some sort, and on the iPad, or I believe now on Android as well. And you can go into settings and you can click on any of the control graphics and move them anywhere. And with the fire button in the middle, you can do that. And then you save it and you leave, and the next time you come back to the game, that UI element is no longer in the lower left corner, it's wherever you put it. So you can rearrange these elements anywhere on the screen. So I'm assuming that they're doing something similar where on startup, they're reading a saved preferences file and applying that to the UI element. You should be able to save the location of the UI, but you will have to grab that yourself and save it to, you might even be able to save it to player prefs. You don't care if someone monkeys with that. Player prefs is not very secure, but it's right there. It's at your fingertips, and it works. So, cool. Any more questions? I'm going to say throw the last ones in, and I'm going to start wrapping up. So let's get some boilerplate out of the way. So if you have any questions to ask, you want to go to the teaching section of the forum, and then that's where you're going to find the free online training from Unity. And here you can give comments, criticisms, positive, negative reviews, suggestions for new classes. That's where it goes. And you can follow us. You can follow us at Unity 3D. You can follow us at the Ant Ranch. That's me. You can follow us at Will Goldstone. That's Will Goldstone. You can follow us at Matt Mirrorfish. That's Matt Shell, who was in here earlier today. And you can follow us at Mike Geig, who is Mike Geig. All right. Catch you guys on the flip side. So I'll talk at you later.